It's good to have you here. And first of all, Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you had a good vacation period.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
It's,
Well,
Nathan.
I got COVID right before Christmas, so
Oh,
I hope it wasn't too severe.
I had fever like 3 days, and but other than that, it was like common cold, more or less. But I'm still recovering. I'm not totally recovered yet, so it seems to take time.
I think it will. Some people, of course, get off quite lucky, and some people simply don't. I was in Europe for a while there, and I caught it in France. Nothing too serious, but I did lose my sense of taste and smell. And I thought it came back, but then I was having wine at a restaurant, and I said, "Is this wine off? It just tastes strong." And people assured me, "No, it's fine. You're broken."
Yeah.
oh no.
Maybe it will save you money on wine for the next few months. You can buy the cheaper stuff.
Yeah, there's an old friend of mine. He's a potter in his mid-70s now, I think. And he's been doing ceramics for over 50 years, 35 of them in Japan. But when he was a student in California, apparently he discovered a wine called Night Train, which was quite popular with winos. It was unbelievably cheap, so perfect for jumping up to the cargo trains as they passed and spending the evening with the stars and quality ethanol.
Nice. It's one of the many wines they have in California.
not, not the externally promoted ones, but
Right.
local market. I see we've got quite a few people turning up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom to our antitrust policy notice. We show this at the beginning of every meeting at the Linux Foundation. And a short version is that it's setting in place the rules that allow everyone to turn up and work well together without worrying about making sure that we're all comfortable. You can find the full antitrust policy on our website. And if you're from an LF member company, you can contact our counsel, Andy Updegrove, with any questions. Now, we have a regular agenda for these meetings. Here's the format for 2023 so far. 10 items there. Don't worry, it's going to be more brisk than it initially appears. Essentially, we're doing some news. Then we're going to go into the interactive section where we can work on stuff. Because we tend to have some new people on calls nowadays, we do a brief introduction to get started. So we'll just do a little run around the room and see who's here on the call today. I'll start off. I'm Shane Coughlin, the General Manager of the OpenChain project. Next, I'll just call out people's name, and if you could just name yourself and what org you're affiliated with, if any, that would be great. Yari, you're first.
Okay, so good morning, good evening. I'm Jari, and currently, actually, I will be working for KPMG International OSPO as OSPO lead.
Congratulations, sounds fun.
Well, I've been there for since July already, but it will be official. Since now I've been contractor, but next week it will be like normal FTE.
Bravo, bravo. Well done. That's great news. Good to start the year. Next up, Jeff. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Happy New Year, everyone. My name is Jeff Lush. I'm the Director of Open Source at Peak 6. And some of you might have previously known me as the founder of Palamida way back when. And so great to see everybody. Happy New Year.
Trivia point, Jeff knows everything about the cool things in San Francisco. So if you ever visit the city, ask him to take you out for a picnic and hang around.
Open invitation, everyone.
He's got a story about parrots. There's wild parrots in San Francisco. You got to get him to tell you that. But that's for later. Let's keep with the intros. Helio, over to you.
Hello, I'm Elio Castro, and I'm from Cariad, and working on the compliance software tooling part. And recently, I became one of the spec chairs from the OpenChain.
Yes, you did. This is actually your first formal call as one of the co-chairs of the specification work group. So Helio and also Chris Wood from Lockheed Martin became co-chairs of our specification work group in December. Helio, it's great to have you as one of the co-chairs and looking forward to what we will do this year.
Thank you.
We've got Brad on the line.
Hi, Shane. My name is Brad Goldring. I'm an attorney with GTC Law Group. And previously, prior to this role, I was the head of open source compliance for Ford Motor Company.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
It's great to have you here.
thank you.
You know, I think we're probably going to be interacting more and more in 2023. We plan to do a lot in the US market space. I see we've got Karen as well, OSADL. Karen, hey, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm fine. Thanks for the short notice invite. Yeah, I'm Karen from Osade. I think we're around occasionally, so not quite new, but not always present. But happy to be here today.
So Karen sent me an email a few minutes ago with some amazing news that we will cover in the automation section. And I said, I'm putting it in the slides for our call, which is happening now. Here's the invite. So it's good to have you here, Carol. Mary. We've got two Mary.
Hi. Oh, which Mary? Yeah.
Which Mary first? We'll go with the Mary who's got the video on. Mary Hardy first.
Okay. Mary Hardy, I'm with Microsoft. I'm an open source attorney there. Formerly with Qualcomm, where I worked with Nathan Kumagai, who's also on the call. I worked with Nathan for many years. Hi, Nathan. So I'm very familiar with OpenChain, although I'm new to the group.
And Mary is taking lead as our Microsoft representative here in the OpenChain project as a platinum member. So she's joined the board and she will be helping to guide our strategy. No pressure there at all.
Thank you.
And now let's try Mary number 2.
Okay. I'm married too.
I'm
I
Mary
work
too.
for Volvo Cars. And
great.
Happy New Year to all of you.
It's great to have
Yes.
you here.
Yeah, we just got approved to form our Osborne, so we will be officially probably in January. Yeah.
Congratulations. That's fantastic news. So Mary Wang and her team in Volvo have been getting ready for this OSPO for quite a few months now, I think, right? But now the approval is there. Are you going to have a relatively small team to start?
Yes, we have like 1.6 maybe or 2.6 people currently.
That's actually not bad. That's not bad at all for starting OSPO. Well done. We'll be looking forward to updates on that very soon.
Sure.
Balakrishna.
Hi, Shane.
Hey.
Good day to everyone. I'm Balakrishna. I currently work with Pegasystems as their principal open source compliance engineer. And before I was working with Bosch as one of the open source expert team members. And hello to you all. Excited to start 2023 with some interesting topics.
And trivia for those who are new, Balakrishna was chair of our education work group until our first major election cycle. Nathan, who will introduce himself in just a minute, is the new chair on education and is taking over some serious work. Balakrishna has done an awful lot, especially with our online training and so on over the years. Great to have you here. Nathan, over to you.
Yeah, hey everyone. Nathan Kumagai, work with Qualcomm, and like Shane said, I chair the education group and used to work with Mary. So Mary's super fun to have you here now. And look forward to working with everyone over this year with the education group.
We have a ton to do. It'll be awesome. And finally, last but definitely not least, Steve.
Good morning, afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm Steve Kilbane, and I'm the Open Source Program Officer Director at Analog Devices.
Steve has been formative in doing a lot of the intricate details in the last few months as we messed around with the security spec and so on. So it's great to have you here. And as you know, we've got a lot to do in the year ahead. Now, speaking of a lot to do, let's go through the news. We have a stunning amount of news, starting with our own project news, because it's us. We get to do that first. There's been an awful lot of announcements around our security specification in the last couple of weeks. First of all, a total of 6 entities around the world have announced that they've got support services around adoption of our security assurance specification. So some of them you'll recognize as global providers of things like certification, such as Bureau Veritas and PwC. Some of those, if you're familiar with the Chinese market, you may recognize in their domains. So CAICT is an organization under the Chinese Ministry of Trade and also a certifier. We have ORCRO, certifier and consultancy, source code control consultancy, OSS consultants. All of these organizations are now officially and publicly providing services for the OpenChain security assurance specification. That's pretty important because with these specifications, we see an awful lot of the supply chain get awareness and then look for various types of assistance on adoption. The announcements from these organizations took place in December, which was around roughly the same time that we handed off the specification to go into ISO. Very excited about that. And something you're about to hear about today, but actually happened on the 20th of December, is the first organization to complete adoption of the security spec was Interneuron, which is an organization based in the United Kingdom and a supplier of technology to the British National Health Service. So they completed their adoption of the security spec on the 20th of December in collaboration with Source Code Control. And we're announcing it publicly today that they've got a conformant program. What this means is we've got 6 providers, 3 of them major global certifiers, providing support for the security spec throughout the market. We've had our first security spec conformance announcement underway today, and we expect other announcements in the next couple of weeks ahead. This all happens as this specification we've written and released and we're seeing adoption and support for enters the ISO transposition process. So today we have a de facto standard. It's going into the process to become a formal ISO standard. We've handed over to JDF in Q4 2022. They'll be taking it through ISO for us. And because it's a fast track process, it's a transposition, it's not about editing, we expect to see graduation as an ISO standard in mid to late 2023. For organizations like Interneuron that adopt the current specification, the de facto standard, they will automatically conform with the ISO standard when it's published. There'll be no changes in requirements. That bash of news there on the security spec is important because we spent a lot of time last year working on the security spec. We edited it and finished it in March. Then we spent some months socializing it. We got ISO Working Group Subcommittee 27, that's Information Communication Technology Security, to informally look at it, provide us some notes, which we'll be going through in the next few calls. Their notes were essentially our key question, does it conflict with anything? Nope. And then they had notes saying, how about you add this? How about you add that? And those are the notes we'll be looking at for future versions of the standard on our future calls. Anyway, finished it in March last year, socialized it, went through to September of last year with the socialization process, and then we started the submission process and handed over in late Q4 to Joint Development Foundation with all of the documentation to get this through the ISO thing as a standard, a sister standard to the one we all know and love, OpenChain 5230, the ISO standard for license compliance. The security standard, in case you're not familiar with it, is not terrifically different to the license compliance standard that we've been working on for many years in the project. The key difference is that the optic is security as opposed to license compliance. However, the standards are close enough to each other that if you adopt one, adopting the other is pretty simple. Anyway, that's our spec news. Lots of support appearing on the security standard. First conformance announcement, and JDF is processing the paperwork with ISO. But we can't hog all of the limelight. We have to talk about other people too. Okay, fine. There's other stuff. So software bill of materials. Honestly, we don't have a huge announcement since our last call on software bill of materials, but we do have one thing that is interesting for the market. SPDX have announced updated Python tools for supporting SPDX. And if you're an SPDX user, this may be of interest to you because they've had a backlog of pull requests to deal with, and they've closed 48 in the last 2 months. So their end of year push meant that the Python tool support for SPDX has dramatically improved. Okay, so if you are interested in software bill of materials support in Python, if you're interested in SPDX, which is an ISO standard, just like our license compliance ISO standard, then you can find improved Python tooling on their project website. Now on security news, we haven't had any cool tooling announcements or stuff like that, but I wanted to flag that OpenSSF has continued to get a lot of momentum. They've hit 100 members just at the end of the year, and a few of the items in the membership might be worth just making a note of. Associate membership, I just note that they have Open Forum Europe appearing there. That's a think tank with close ties to the European Union. So that's a good sign that there might be some interconnect with European initiatives around security and digital sovereignty going into OpenSSF in the future, right? So that's heartening. It's important that these initiatives are not just US-centric, and I think OpenSSF is scaling in a way that suggests good links into other continental approaches. OSPO news, there's something coming up. If you're in Europe, you might want to look at going to the Ospology Live event, January 23rd, 24th. It's happening in Amsterdam, and this will be a community gathering. The first one took place in the second half of last year in Sweden. That's actually where I got to hang out with some great people like Jimmy from Ericsson and of course Mary from Volvo, who's on the line today. And we had a lot of activity from the European community sharing not just to do stuff, for instance, on OSPOs. We had people from OpenChain, we had people talk about SPDX, people talked about the Chaos project for metrics on health of communities. Ospology Live in the Netherlands will also be a kind of coalition of projects working together, and it's something to put into your agenda. Okay, automation news. There are 2 items here. One, which is a slow burner, but super important. The automation work group has been working on something for a while now, and that's a capability map. The capability map is really designed to explain what tools should do, and what tools are required to do X, Y, Z, and what those tools should do as a minimal activity. This description of tooling is the type of architectural approach that we somewhat have lacked in the market. People see SCA tools out there, they're not sure what to get, what to buy, what to compile, what to run. The capability map explains to you what type of tools you want to have in place, what they should do, and why. The map itself has been built over, I guess, more than a year now in the automation work group. And just recently, one of our board members, Marcel from Bosch, decided to convert the PowerPoint document into Markdown. And that's available today as a pull request on GitHub. That's significant because every time we've converted something into Markdown, we've seen increased editing speed, we've seen translations, better dissemination. Okay, so we had a lot of work on this PowerPoint, people looking at it on the calls and making notes. Marcel has just moved it to Markdown. It's just about to be merged, and that will allow, I think, the capability map to be understood more quickly, iterated more quickly, and adopted more quickly. The outcome of this capability, oh, Helio, hand up, over to you.
Shane, just remember that this is the second interaction. This has been done like for 4 or 5 years. This is the last interaction of this automation part. So it's passing for a long work. But the strange thing is that Marcel started and Marcel now is done again. So it's full circle now.
Okay, so then this iteration we've been working on is just the latest generation of this entire concept, which Marcel started about 5 years ago. My goodness. There you go. Well, now that he has returned to the fold, we will regard it as our shining light. This time we will definitely get it completed. Great note on that. And Helio has been part of the tooling work for many years. So we're definitely going to rely on you for details like this to tease out the nuance of what's been going on.
Yeah, hope so.
I'm very optimistic about where we can go with things like this, because one problem companies have is trying to work out what they want to do. And a map like this can guide their investment in energy. But there's a second news item, and this is why Karen was so interesting. We've talked for years about the white whale, this mythical creature of open source compliance. And one of them was, what if there was a shared database of compliance information that we could just use so people wouldn't have to compile their own databases? And this has been something that's been murmured for many years. Now, OSADL has actually gone and done that. They've launched a project which is a curation database of CC0 database information, SPDX supported, over 100 packages available. It's on GitHub. So this compliance information on pretty popular, you could say, packages that people would normally use is not going to bring anything massively new to the table per se, but what it's doing is it's providing a centralized public domain way to have the compliance information about these packages, and then to add and iterate and improve that compliance information on a database that anyone can use. And any tool that can ingest SPDX can populate its internal database as necessary with this compliance information. I don't want to be too dramatic about it, but given that we've talked about this for years, and now we're seeing the emergence of something which already is designed to support SPDX, I think it could be a big deal. And Karen, we're going to schedule a webinar on this later this month, your team permitting, I believe.
Yeah, we're excited to tell you about this new project. So I think it has the potential to grow fairly big. As you said, the idea is reusability and simplicity to promote trustworthiness, because reusing compliance information is always a question of trust. And I think we set up this project to promote this required trust in the data. So excited to talk about it.
Oh yeah, no, this is a very interesting project. By the way, everyone, you've seen lots of slides on links on these slides. Don't worry, you're getting a copy of these slides. They're going out to the mailing list. You'll have them in your hands. You can kick the tires on absolutely all of this stuff as soon as the call is over. And you know, Carol, let's dig into this further. Provisionally, I just got an email from Karen that apart from 2 to 3 p.m. CET, 24th of January works. Okay, we're going to schedule this on the 24th of January, and I'll send out the exact time after Karen and I sync in the background. But you'll have, before the end of this month, a full deep dive into what this is, and then we can bring that information into things like the tooling work group and see where we go. Wow, that was a lot of news. Okay, news is done. Now it's time for community work. Unless you have any questions. If you have any questions, we can do them right now.
Yep, I have one.
Okay.
Do you have anything planned for FOSDEM or similar?
So the last I heard, Alexis was running a track in FOSDEM and covering software bill of materials. And I need to pull out that data and see what the update is on that. Are you going to FOSDEM, by the way?
Yep, and maybe that's an interesting thing to warn that Philippe will organize a completely workshop for the tooling. He's on a day before FOSDEM there, and the same day is running the Open Source Foundation Europe event happening on the afternoon there. So if people go into the FOSDEM, remember that one day before we have these two events. That's completely interesting to go.
Okay, that's really good to know. What I'll try to do then is I'll try to send to the list an update warning people about this ahead. So Philip is moderating the event on the day before. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe OpenChain could lend a hand there. Find
Sure.
some. Yeah, why not?
Let's see if we can.
Yeah.
Now that with who knows, we can check if Marcel is around and volunteer him. He's got energy. He's contributing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, okay, fantastic. I will get the FOSDEM schedule item out by email to everyone, so they'll know that, especially the day ahead. For those of you who are unfamiliar, FOSDEM is one of Europe's largest open source gatherings. It takes place in a university, and several thousand people turn up. And normally
It's the largest now.
Is it the largest?
Yeah, it is the largest, yes. It used to be the Brazilian one, but the Brazilian one found down a long time ago. Then now FOSDEM is the largest.
My goodness.
Yeah, it's 6,000 persons. There's more than 600 talks in 2 days. It's pure insanity, but everyone there.
Gosh, it's also the best place to catch influenza in Europe.
COVID, influenza, beer,
Everyone gets sick.
you catch everything there.
Don't touch anything, don't breathe, you'll be fine. Okay, that was a good note. Thank you, Helio. Okay, so we got some stuff to do on standards, and I didn't want to do anything too meaty to get the year started, Helio, but I thought what might be fun, just 2 items that I noticed that you may or may not want to talk about. One item that came up, and let me just copy paste these directly into the chat. One item that came up was a question, an innocent question, and it literally has no other content except, should we revisit the contribution section of the license spec? Right now it basically says have a policy for contribution, and that's all of our guidance. And there's an argument that we could put more in, or there's an argument that we shouldn't. And maybe that's something worth chatting about. What do you think?
It sounds difficult because everyone has a different way to see this kind of policy requests there, and then generic sounds plausible in what's happening today. We can look that is kind of acceptable in the multiple environments, different places, but it's hard.
It's hard. One thing that's interesting is it always brings out of the kind of the woodwork that argument that happens between people. Is contribution something you should do? And a lot of people say yes, and then there's other people who say, but it's an option not to, right? And we have to be cautious as an ISO standard to let people choose their path as opposed to saying they have to do X.
It all depends how we treat the thing. We are treating the thing like a specification, like a book that you're writing and get revisions, or you're treating like a software project that we have in a multiple corrections between actually this is committed there. So now we should, instead of generic policy requests, we should first define how we are treating there. It's a software project, it's a document project, which kind of this project is, and then the contribution could align with top of this one. It's one idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to pull up just the exact point where we're at with contribution. Just trying to find it right now.
We can do the one good idea that could be is treated like the Python project do it for them. They created the PEP, the proposals for enhancement of Python there. And they do it as a completely detailed document about everything. And so it passed to the huge committee to approval, and then it fits or not there. Then it could be a way that it's not that much generic. It needs to be a well-formed proposal to change it, and then this contribution need to be doing in the proper way.
Really good point. I mean, right now, what we have is just that if an organization considers contributions, then a written policy should exist. The policy should be communicated, and a process that implements the policy should exist. And that's it. We're very light touch on this.
Yeah. Shane, this is...
Sorry,
go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
This is Mary Hardy. I was just going to say it does mirror the policy section in the program foundation 3.1.1. It's it's very similar and it's meant to be generic. So I was just wondering, I might have missed this, I'm sorry, but what did you mean by pointers to elsewhere?
Okay, so one thing that had come up on previous calls was we say a policy should exist, but we give no idea of what the policy should look like. And there were suggestions that should we have pointers to existing contribution policies to help ground people? Now, traditionally, our stance has been nope. we don't do that. And we let people find the stuff in the reference library or the community because we don't want to be prescriptive. But it's something that has come up again and again. So one of the things we tend to do in this community is to ricochet back onto the topics and see if we still feel the same.
Oh, I see. Well, I was just thinking we do have a reference policy template on the OpenChain website that's pretty easy to get to, right? In the resources.
Yes.
But there's no pointer to that, I guess is what you're saying.
Right. And I suppose, I mean, the blue sky here, we could add to the beginning of the spec a note that there's a massive reference library if people are curious about stuff.
Mm-hmm. And Shane, it's been a little while since I've looked at the reference library that we have. I think it's like maybe Google and Verizon around open source license policy, where they say, here's our policy, and they're up there on CC, SA, etc. They may, I forget if they actually have chapters on contribution in there as well. I think there may be a couple already in what we consider the license policy examples in the reference library, but there are, I think, contribution examples. But I'm a big believer of if we don't point people to it, it's kind of a miss because it's a vacuum. People are looking for us for guidance. Like we might not say this is what we have to have as a policy, but if we have more than one policy, I think we're not being we're not saying you have to have this one. We're saying here's a universe. 2 is a universe. It'd be nice if they're 10, but I guess I'd be on that side of the argument. Is we should have a curated list. We should try to get people to encourage reuse of these, especially since they are under CC, SA, or similar licenses. And yeah, it's just good to keep the garden growing as opposed to just storing them away, never to be looked at again.
A really good point. And hypothetically, then, if we let's see if I can do this live. So on GitHub, once we open up the reference material library, we have a ton of material here nowadays. And when it comes to something like the policy template, I think it's, yeah, we have an actual policy template organization policy thing in a spreadsheet, which works on the same principle as Lego. The idea is choose your policy poison and build out from there. So with stuff like that, it's very flexible because it's not inherently prescriptive. It's Lego. And hypothetically, then we have a lot of material like that. And rather than calling it out in specific sections of the spec, maybe somewhere in the beginning of the spec, we can call out that this library exists with these policy templates, with these other documents, training material. And this allows people, as they read the spec and see, oh, I need the policy, then they go back to the beginning and potentially, oh, hey, Henrik, Happy New Year. potentially use that as a fallback. So they just swing back to the beginning of the spec and see, oh, I need to have a policy and go back up there and check the link. Hypothetically, could that be a solution that would be appropriate?
Yeah. You know, Shane, this is Nathan.
Hey, Nathan.
I think underlying this is one thing I think we'd like to do in the education work group is try to bring forward some of these resources that are really useful. And so, you know, maybe that's a solution as well, is make certain things more visible, because I know if you click into the GitHub site, there's so much there, right? So let's bring forward certain things. Let's better message what they're for. You know, help them be more accessible to people, and then that might close the gap as well, and without really even touching the spec.
Mhm.
I love the idea of having improved curation on the material. So the size of our reference library is well north of 1,000 documents nowadays. So we're trying to curate it, but having a selected section of the really, really good stuff, and then it goes downwards to the really good stuff, and then the good stuff, and eventually gets to whatever Shane wrote in 2012.
And that's the downside of putting a link into this specification, is you then have to make sure that link is maintained and stays active
For decades, potentially.
Mhm. And I agree with that point. I think having the spec be kind of ageless without, say fast forward a year, maybe we're not on GitHub, we're on GitLab. That ages out much quicker than the spec does.
Yeah.
But OpenChainProject.org should remain for years. And I think people come to that, they learn about the spec, they go off to, the spec home, but they're still going to have OpenChainProject.org in their bookmarks. And I think it's good for us to have, here's our reference library. It doesn't have to be part of the spec, but it's part of the ecosystem that we live in.
Yeah.
So I would vote for, don't put the reference library in the spec itself, but have it be curated as part of the project and have people pointed toward it.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I
I
like
have
those.
some reflection.
Yeah, I just
Yes.
saw your hands up. Hey.
I have some reflection about this contribution.
Yes.
I just finished my open source policy this week, in fact. The three areas, consumption, distribution, and the contribution. So the contribution is not any kind of a legal requirement, right? It's more like different company can choose their strategy. You can decide if this company are allowed to contribute or not. As this spec said, it's very good. The first sentence, if you read it, if an organization considers contribution to open source project, then. So if you don't, this is not available. So it's not a false or stuff. It's very good. So I don't have any comments for this. I think this is good enough as a specification here. It's optional, kind of, right?
Right.
Yes. I do have some, I forgot my points here. Let's see.
I was just going to confirm, Mary and Jeffrey, your assumption is correct. It is in the template. There's a whole section on contributions, and it's got lots of different different sorts of examples that you can use. Well, I wouldn't say lots, but it's got more than one. So there is something there in that template.
Enough to get started. The template was originally made by Andrew Katz from Orcro, and his team did a great job at putting some customer data in there. Sorry, go ahead. My apologies.
Yeah, I just have a reflection about this specification, the policy, the relationship. When I doing creating the policies, I'm thinking I compare with the specification. Also, I have both in my hands. I'm thinking in this specification, we don't require the policy will point to the standard number like ISO 52302 2022 or 20, I don't remember, 22 maybe. So we don't have that. That is a must for me. It's like in your policy, you need to mention this ISO standard.
Yeah.
but maybe that's too detailed.
How would you like us to fix that? What could we do that would help?
Let me recheck this spec again.
We could add an example in the template, like you're describing.
Yeah.
I don't see it actually called out in one of the examples. It's not a bad idea.
So in this case, it's more like our ISO standard is written in the policy for all the companies.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry, I did just find it. So if you go to line 85, column H, it does talk about how it's designed to be compliant with the specification. So it's something that you, one of the suggestions is to add it on line 85. And
For
80.
those who don't have it open, it's an Excel spreadsheet. Yes, we did build a spreadsheet. I know.
So it's a good idea, Mary, and it's on. It happens to be there already. It's just maybe hidden.
hidden.
Yeah.
It's in the Excel template, not in the spec, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It sounds like the guidance through that, through the spec and looking at the template needs improvement so that people join up these things more easily. So yeah.
So I think that you should take a different approach, because if you saw that we are discussing like for 15 minutes with different opinions about that, and then go away from the generics will be completely impossible at some point.
Yeah.
So why we simply don't ask for people to contribute in a different way for this? So we have a proper examples coming from official companies that can share their examples to show how this could be. So this is the generics, and this is how companies apply it in their way, these principles. So for this, they have some base.
They do have a lot of companies publish their policy in the GitHub today.
Yeah, exactly. So we just need to make a relation between these two.
But it doesn't mean each of them or all of them are perfect. So it always have a continuous improvement anyway.
Of course, but
it's the best. Yes, you're right.
But we say as an example there. So
yes,
we have generics here. How can you say that the thing that comes out of this will be perfect or not? We cannot. We even don't know what is perfect or not. So
that's a really good point. You know what it sounds like? It sounds like we might need to go to the policy template and update it, maybe to point outwards to some of these companies to improve the discoverability of the point Mary had, which was, the link between the spec and the policy template saying, start here. This is the Lego you can get started with. So my take is maybe we need to take Nathan's landing page, running with Jeff's point, and we need to update the policy spec to make it clearer and link outwards in there.
That I think that's even is the core of the question in GitHub. It's not because that is too sparse, but it's because some people looking for this and says, where should I start? They don't have a place to start.
No.
So it's like a software then. With some examples, we can actually know where to start this.
Yep. Okay.
Well, the question isn't whether there should be examples. The question is whether they should be referenced from the specification.
And we seem to be falling on, if I understand the mood of the call, not in the spec, but around it.
Yeah.
Okay. No pressure, Nathan. You've got an ISO standard. Thousands of companies using this.
And I guess that. Sorry to add one point, because I know we have some partners in this space who are helping companies with OpenChain conformance, and almost certainly they're going to be coming in with their document dumps and their 3-ring binders and saying, here's our sample policy, and then maybe based on the reference library origins, maybe they'll be contributed back. Maybe that would be a nice thing. But I think that's as we fast forward this year, I think we're going to see people coming in with their happy document saying you're an A, you're a B, you're a C. And for us to say, I think we don't want to point people away from, those suppliers. I guess that's to say is another reason to say, don't put it in the spec, but have it in the ecosystem.
Right.
And see what happens when we fast forward a year. We might see enough kind of turns of the crank of people saying, we've used this doc and it works really well, and we're going to contribute it to OpenChain, and it's been vetted by 10 companies who are willing to go on record and get it versioned and updated. So, and maybe that's a thing for us to push on this year is let's kind of something like you and I talked about, Shane, is we see the Verizon doc, we see the Google doc, but I personally haven't seen a lot of reuse of them. Somebody saying, thank you, Google, I've taken your doc and I've added my name to the bottom of it and I've updated it and I've removed these chapters. That would be a great thing to see in 2023 is some of those reference docs be used, be updated and live with additional CC BYs, CC SAs at the bottom from well-known companies.
That's a really good point. And when it comes to the providers in our ecosystem, I think we can expect to get some good support from them. The companies have been really good at kicking material towards us, and entities like PwC seem to be dramatically ramping up their provision around the world. So, I think we can literally go to them and say, we're improving our curation, we're also looking for juicing our documents. Can you bring in some of that information, that data points to us? So yeah, okay. That's an action item for me to go collect all the kids and bring them to the table.
And maybe one more point, because like OSADL, and we have Karen from there, they do have the template as well, policy template.
They do. And
I don't know if there's a way to merge some of these efforts with them as well. I don't know. Open question.
We'll definitely be able to collaborate and see what we've got in common in our templates. Karen, let's schedule a call with yourself and Carson if he's available to run through this stuff.
Yeah, sure. We created the policy template as well with the spec in the background as well. So they're definitely compatible as well. It goes a bit more into specifics, but we're happy to talk about it as well.
Fantastic.
And Karen, I must say that I have read it through a couple of times, and I do like many things and aspects that are different from the Andrew's template. But if those two can be somehow combined, I think that would be killer.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
Schedule Q2, the world's biggest template. Now, I've noticed that we're zooming through time. So I'm just going to pause and check. Nathan, do you want to have some time to run through some education stuff?
Sure, Shane.
All right. So I'll just move our slide over to the Nathan side of things. There was another topic on licensing, but it's a big chewable topic. It's for another time. It's, do we redefine open source? I'll explain it another time, guys. I know it's triggering, but let's move on to what we can do in this time, which is reference material, education, Nathan's domain. Over to you, my friend.
Sure, and well, try this out here. I'm going to share a Google Docs link. Been working on that for better, for trying to find some sort of method to better collaborate than GitHub issues, comments. So I'm going to send that, post that here. So just a quick update on the education group. We had our first kind of working meeting and had a nice meeting at the end of last year. I think the intention here is we'll start doing maybe a bi-monthly or twice a month kind of working meeting just to, get through ideas, get feedback, write things down. Shane, I don't know if you wouldn't mind opening the document there that I just posted.
I'm on it right now.
Okay.
Here we go. And I'm about to share. Bang. There we are.
Yeah, thank you. So I was taking some notes here, took some notes from the last meeting as well. But I think if we meet fairly often, we can start to make progress through things. to me, I think the first priority is starting to set up kind of, flows of working, right? Like, what are the best documents to get started with? What are these kind of top tier documents we want to bring to the front and get everyone's attention onto? Where's the best place to put it? Some of the first feedback we got was the path to conformance was one of the items that have been useful for people, at least for an early entry point, right? Because people come to the community and maybe they have a lot of experience, maybe they worked in a law firm or they've worked in an OSPO before. Maybe they just need some resources to help create presentations for their company to make changes internally, or create their own training material, things like that. Or there might be people who are very new to this, they just found out about this OSI spec. They need some material to kind of help catch up quickly. So, I think this path to conformance helped organize some of the reference material that we have or are thinking about how to create things so we can target the, different places people are entering in here. One thing I think we realized, and forgive me if I got the name, this was wrong. I think Mary Matron had suggested, let's point to, for some of those early entrants, there are trainings from like Linux Foundation that people can look at. We might have, a landing page with some reference material to, third-party resources, so we're not reinventing the wheel about what is open source, what is compliance, things like that. Once people get up to speed with these third-party resources, they can come here and we can use our, the focus we have as a community to talk about, okay, what is OpenChain? What are we bringing to the table? Here's resources you can use to, convince people internally that you need to comply with OpenChain. Here's resources like the policy template that'll help you put together the materials you need. So, and that's, I think, probably where we're going to get the most, bang for our buck, right? Most return on investment for the time we're investing here is working on the OpenChain kind of specific things here. So, I've taken some notes here, listed some ideas that I've heard over, the last meeting in the last hour here. Started listing some of what I thought seemed to be some of the primary resources or the most mature resources. So this link here is, I edited everyone as commenters. I could easily add everyone as editors. What do you think, Shane? What's the best kind of? I know we had some trouble with like, issues in the past, but
I think this is good to just get it rolling. We know that we'll have a blank space with our Chinese contributors on the Google Docs, but for at least half of our calls, that's not super relevant, right? And what I can do is I can take snapshots and take it to our China work group on WeChat as a Word doc and bring it back and bring updates from them back. But quite frankly, the China work group is most likely to want to look at this when it's done and translate it, as opposed to actively contribute in the same way as the European or American community.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And I think the intention is this is supposed to be some pretty flexible, fast-moving document. Shane, if it's okay, I think the time that you had set worked pretty well for the last round. I was thinking maybe the second week in the fourth week, we would have work group meetings. If that sounds good to you. And I think one thing I'd suggest is maybe one kind of, at least I'm in Pacific time, where I could do one in the morning, one in more of the late afternoon time, to try to make things more available to people. So if that sounds good, maybe I'll communicate with you offline just to get those invites up.
If that's doable, that would be fantastic. We could have, that would allow us to bring in, for instance, our Japan and Korea communities and so on. And fantastic. Yeah, okay, let's do it offline. We aim provisionally then second and fourth weeks.
Okay.
The blistering schedule there. You're competing with the tooling work group and our telco guys.
Yeah, so I think if I'm on the off weeks for those groups, right? If I do the second and fourth week.
Yep, you are.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. So that's a quick update from where we're at. I think what I'll try to use this document as kind of the roadmap as we develop things or get more, I have a few other Google Docs links that I can drop into here that people can use to view what's going on. If I think I might keep this one as comment open only, and I'll open the rest of the documents as editor with editor permissions, if that sounds good. So. Yeah, so any thoughts, comments there?
That
Yeah.
looks good to me. And I mean, I think the path to conformance, for those of you who are not old timers on the project, is the idea was that we'd catch people and guide them through conformance. And we went out of sync on keeping the path to conformance updated for a while there. But it sounds like on this call alone, we've seen why we need the path to conformance back, to take people, to guide them into those templates and other material. So it just seems really timely, Nathan, to bring this back and get this stuff. As one of the main comments for us, as we go through this, it sounds like people adding judgment calls or notes on whether they think those are the correct links might be a good item. They might be like, I think that resource isn't suitable. I think this resource should be. Yeah.
Yep. Or please, if you have another resource that's particularly helpful to you, please add it in. And reminder, these are things that are helpful to, any of our advocates and OpenChain advocates and for your organization. If you're advocating, adoption of OpenChain in your company, what are things you'd like to have so you don't have to start from scratch, right? You don't have to, create your own presentation. There are things that you could start with, fill in the detail that you need to, and then get going quickly.
And we are in a position where if people tell us that document X should exist, we can create it. So it's mostly a discovery issue for us. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, please, any comments welcome. What do you think is important? What do you think is helpful? Is there something missing? Would love to know that.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nathan.
Nathan, one thing I can add is, and I have to look and see what it's like for the new year here. I know in the past when I've tried to get the reference materials, it's so big because we have so many. If for the educational materials, if we're able to keep like a single link which downloads, a 25 megabyte archive of reference docs and PowerPoints and whatnot, as opposed to like the 2.5 gigabyte or whatever it ends up being. Just because I know when I've clicked it before, it's like it successfully downloads like 3 out of 5 times when I try to download the entire reference library, which is okay. But I think for the on-ramp, it should be more of a 25 megabyte, single click, get it. Doesn't need the history, doesn't need the prototypes, etc. I'm not sure where we are right now with the educational materials, but just to.
I kind of, nice to see you, Jeff, by the way. What nice thing would, or at least what I have in kind of mind is maybe a dozen or so documents, right? That are the top tier ones, the most polished, most, concise, easy to translate ones, that help people, right? And that we could have, like, I think what you mentioned earlier, like a landing page just for those things, so that you don't have to dig through the thousands of documents. You have a landing page for those things and maybe some links and references to, the other hundreds of documents, right? If you need them, if you want to go diving into that, right?
And we might be in a position to be bold as well with what we do with the reference library. I mean, there might be some material in there that's so crufty. We're like, we don't need that in the archive. We just get rid of it now.
I like how we can always do word choice on what the website looks like, but I kind of like how it's, we're targeted, like, you want to help out, click here. You're new to the spec, click here. And I think using more of those kind of, breadcrumbs, you're brand new, click here. You want to get started, you want to roll out OpenChain at your organization, click here. You get the archive downloaded with a very, very easy, like, read me first.
Right.
And, what do you have here? You have your education docs, you have your blah, blah, blah. So more later, but I think that's something I think as we look at 2023, when I go look at the downloads with that eye of, I want to roll this out, that's what I'll be helping out for, I guess, is giving that feedback.
Yeah.
That'll be useful. I like that.
Yeah, it's tough sometimes to come to the website with or erase your brain and if you're brand new to it. But one thing I found though is like, with Balakrishna and then the education group before this, they've actually created a lot of really great stuff we need to like just bring forward in front of people. And so, some really useful stuff. So I think if we can maybe choose our top even half dozen documents, let's really polish those, allow those to be translated, I think that will be immensely useful if we can do that in the near term.
And is that something we can use the Slack for, or is there a feeling that the Slack is, that we want to have, Zoom meetings to have the things discussed versus a Slack or?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's open. I mean, it's open.
Maybe we can take the standard pattern, like first we discuss in an open channel there. If actually the topic becomes too subjective and you separate in a separate channel, then you discuss there. If the things become too heated point that, okay, we need a meeting, then we go to Zoom meeting. But then we will avoid it, directly go to the meetings there. Just start an open. If actually extended, go to the closed part. If closed not enough, then you go to the meeting. I really think that we never reach the meeting point at this way.
All right. Yeah, that sounds great. Why don't I'll dig into that over the next week. I do like to have some regular meetings open just so people can
regular meetings,
talk.
yes.
And if I'm going to sit and work on something anyway, why not have open it up to the group? And so yeah,
absolutely.
Let's do both. Thanks for that idea, both of you. Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, we are out of time.
Yeah.
A couple of notes. Yari found that a link to the Korean work group, which has an open source policy sample as well. So they have an open source policy document sample here. So it sounds like we're going to be sitting down, consolidating what Korea has, OSADL has, and what we have at Central, and making that beautiful, perfect policy artifact in the near-ish term. As well as that, Nathan's work here on the path to conformance is obviously going to be critical. And don't forget, we are by no measure done with our editing around the specs. Today, we touched on one topic, and I wasn't kidding when I said there was a juicy topic to go on. Basically, the Chinese government said that they don't think the OSI and FSF definitions alone necessarily cover everything that's being called open source nowadays. And CAICT said, well, has there been a discussion about that? Has there been a discussion about whether open source has changed beyond this, or whether those should be the only two authorities on what open source is? And that was brought up because our spec explicitly calls out open source as being either OSI or FSF lists. We say that's what open source is. And they said, well, we think people need to talk about that. Is that what open source is around the world today? So that's a discussion that they want for both security and licensing spec, which could fall deeply into philosophy, which we don't want, and they certainly don't want it either. But they're just raising the point that this type of thing hasn't been discussed recently in the domain of something like a standard, which calls out, this is open source. Yeah, as Yari said, open source versus source available. And
yeah, that's a good. And I think that I have a very interesting position that I think the open source is dead, but not in the way that people thinking about. It's just because no company anymore affords to have enclosed source inside their premises to develop their softwares. They don't care. Companies don't care about paying, but they care about the source code available. That's the difference thing. And then I think that's open source already win. It's the source there. This is a normal thing. So the terms open source has become more kind of generic thing to say for everything that we are using today. And the difference thing will be the closed source applications. That ones will be different.
Yeah.
Then maybe the Chinese government is going this way as well too. They try to understand that they can see the things, not necessarily need to be free or open in general, but still the code is there, the source is available.
Mary flagged that this was dealt with in SPDX, so we'll have to go and look and see what the conversation in SPDX was, and see where
Just
that
as a
is.
data point, yeah, it's a common problem.
Yeah, and I want to be super clear that our friend at CAICT, she didn't want to suggest that we have to change things, but she wanted to suggest that we have to talk about it. And she pulled out, for instance, this lawsuit, which she felt indicated that the legal jurisdictions calls would be made which don't map to our definition of open source in this ISO standard. So that's her optic, and that's where she said we need to table this as a discussion, or she'd like us to table it.
Can you send a link to this so I can read it?
Yep. I've just put it into the chat.
Oh, perfect.
So
Thanks.
it's just there. So it's just Security Assurance Spec issue 20. And I'll also send a link to the version. There's a version here, exactly the same thing for the license compliance spec as well, issue 63. It just links back to the security one. But I mean, TLDR, the question in play is it truly canonical to call out OSI plus FSD as being open source in 2023? Is that the correct two sources of defining open source now?
Yeah,
I do think that's the tension, especially this year, as everyone's focused on software supply chain and all that. If we limit ourselves to open source only, and maybe we have to because of our mandate, there's open source, there's kind of source available but not OSI approved, and then there's commercial.
Yeah.
And
wait.
we end up with 3 specs. That seems like a waste when it's all very similar, but that's the question for 2023, I think. So I'll table that.
That's more than that. You are thinking about looking for the big companies, let's say even Microsoft, or as in the case Volkswagen Group. We are 5 companies there. We can see our source internally, but still we are different entities there. So it means that we have source available is not open source, but still the code is among the other companies. It's a mess. It's really difficult to say that open source. We call it, you used to call it inner source, everyone knows there, but inner source doesn't say properly everything that happens there in this case of big companies that has several subsidiaries.
And then there was the interesting situation. I think it was MongoDB relicensed to prevent cloud providers. Heather wrote the license for them, Heather Meeker, or was one of the significant writers. And there's a question there. There's this type of license which precludes a certain use case. To what extent is that not open source? And for instance, I talked with Heather and she said she intended it to be an open source license, but it introduces a restriction which we would say that that's not allowed. And that type of tension is right there in the air. And as Jeff said, we are in an interesting situation where we're getting a portfolio of stuff. What we ultimately need is to collapse it down to just software management.
Yeah, but after the Mongo, it came the AGPL and other similar changes that just follow the thing. So we are already living with several examples of this. Mongo is just the first one.
Yeah. One bright point might be that we can have a discussion around this without getting political, I think, in this domain. So we can just look at what's on the table for the supply chain, what's affecting us, and are we somehow missing part of the optics because of the way we're approaching it today? We're 8 minutes.
I have a quick question. The version of the spec that I'm looking at, 2.1, open source definition is actually different than what I see there. Is that because it's from the security spec, or?
Yeah, no, what happened there is, let's see, I guess that's from the security spec directly. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because in the OpenChain spec, it adds or similar license to the end of that sentence.
Yeah, that's correct. On the license spec, it's got or similar license here.
Thank you.
And the security spec does not have that. So I suppose we could say that or similar could be the way out. Have it in both specs.
That might be too controversial to resolve it since we're over time.
Yeah, nope, not resolving today. I told you this was a meaty one. This will keep us going for a while. All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for a wonderful first call. Have a beautiful day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you very, very soon.
Yeah. Happy New Year for everyone.
Happy New Year. Make it a good one, everyone.
You're all.